you were one of the earliest kind of executives at Postmates. You joined within the first few years of the startups journey. You've had your own startups. You've also angel invested in startups. I want to hear from you. What is your story? How did Peter get here today?
Look, I think broadly speaking, my story is non-conventional. So I grew up in Australia uh, in the 80s, and computer science wasn't really a thing taught in school or anything like that. It was maybe if you were a nerd, you taught yourself AppleSoft Basic and that sort of stuff, and you had an Apple IIe. And graduating from high school in 1990, I was scheduled to go to law school as for undergrad, and I took a gap year. And in that gap year, I was really lucky. I taught myself to code and got a job offer to come to the US a year later. And that's just weird, right? Like I I finished high school, no degree in computer science, started work as a data entry operator, literally typing quarantine inspection reports onto a mainframe, and parlayed that into a little bit of training. Our department was the first department to get Windows computer. Like this is at the dawn of Windows. This is like a long time ago. And started university, did my first year, and in the middle of that, got a job offer to go do this startup in the US. And I didn't really know what a startup was. I was 19, like I was your age, right? But ended up coming to the US March 12th, 1993. And we started this company called Phoenix, which was a banking system company. And the weird thing is like, and this is a founder dynamic, in some cases, being oblivious to how hard things are is a huge advantage in the sense that you're prepared to climb up some impossible mountain because you don't realize it's actually impossible and you think it's just people weren't very good last time. And I didn't know what a banking system was. And so we built it, and we built one from scratch. And it was really kind of amazing. We got super lucky. First customers turned into first investors and vice versa. And then we ended up going public in 1996. And it wasn't like a $1 billion IPO or anything like that. We were a small company. But it was the process of getting there and being sort of in that moment. And we went public when I was 24, right? And it was kind of weird. I didn't even really understand what going public was either, because like coming from Australia, it's just not a thing. Fast forward to today, and I've sort of done 13 or 14 companies, three really big ones, Nokia, Google, and Uber. Nokia was because the startup we built doing mobile email was acquired by Nokia. And then joining Nokia was amazing. So I joined Nokia in 2002, 2003, when it was the king of the world. Like everybody used Nokia phones worldwide. It was like, I don't know, it's hard to sort of say, like 5 times bigger than Apple is today type of thing. It was crazy. And on again and off again, this sort of oscillating between big company and small company has been a great way for me to both be reinvigorated, but also to build up a cash position. And this is really important for founders. Starting a company is hard, and it costs a lot of money, and it costs a lot of personal sacrifice. And you've got to want to have a certain amount of craziness in you to do it. But also you need basically financial stability, because you're not going to make a whole lot of money real time. And even if you're at OpenAI, you're not going to make money until someone gives you a tender offer. And no one should judge doing a startup based on the crazy successes of OpenAI. You should grind it based on 9 out of 10 don't make it a first year, 95 out of 100 don't make it to the second year. And if after all of that, you can still live with effectively a minimal salary wherever you are, then you're in a good place. But if you don't have a financial reserve and you're thinking your startup investors are going to pay you $350 a year in base pay, you've got another thing coming.
Do you think great founders are made, or do you think they're born? Is it kind of do you have to kind of be
Mm.
born with the craziness to an extent?
uh, I would say being a founder is more art than science. Let's put it that way. And I think, I don't know, I see a high correlation between musicians and founders and people that are comfortable in the public eye, actors, and sort of people that are comfortable presenting and being in public. Because it's really, really hard to get people to follow you if you're a shrinking violet. And it's even harder to get investors excited about investing in you if you can't fill a room and be amazing. That's not to discourage introverts from doing it. It's just harder. And so, or it's harder for the introvert to be successful, I would generally say, unless it's super deep tech science stuff where the introvert CEO is perfect. I think it's relatively rare that you start off on one skill set and learn your way into being a founder. It's more, I don't know, most of the founders that I've hung out with tend to have always been that way. Some of them will suffer, working at big FANG companies for 5 to 10 years in order to build their professional chops and cash balance sheet. But I don't know, there's probably a gene mutation that someone's going to discover at some point with DNA scanning. Crazy founder, DNA 72, and you'll realize, oh, he's got the gene. She's totally got the gene. But at the moment, I would generally say most of the folks that I've hung out with, it's more in the born, not made category.
Hmm. You spent a great deal of time, you joined Postmates in the kind of like the earlier stages. You were the COO, kind of saw the company grow. Obviously, they were one of the exceptional ones, like you said, the ones that did succeed, and they had a $2 billion exit to Uber. I want to talk to you about your time there and maybe some of the kind of implicit lessons from that journey that you learned, some of the takeaways from, you obviously helped grow that platform into what it became. Or some things, some non-obvious things maybe that you learned during that journey?
So to be fair, my tenure at Postmates was quite small, and it was tumultuous and exciting and crazy and startup life. I think we grew by 8 to 10% a week for 6 months, and that sort of growth is like crazy town. At Synctera, we're growing by 8 to 10% a month, and that feels scary. 8 to 10% a week was crazy. And the difference between Synctera, which is a software company where you don't need humans per se to deal with growth, and Postmates, where you have to recruit Postmates, get them efficient, get them on the platform. And every week you need 10% more of them to deal with demand. That was a really big challenge. So I, I feel like I helped Postmates in that phase, but I don't want to sort of take credit for the whole team who did an amazing job getting it from the earliest phases of incubation through to selling to Uber.
Absolutely. W- I've seen a lot of founders in the process of building a company. They have to get the ball rolling, right? Like, so for example, you're building Synctera. You mentioned, 8%, month over month. There are founders who hear that and they're like, well, I wonder how he like even got the ball rolling for these. So you've built multiple startups. You've done this multiple times. How, if you're a first time founder, you're starting, you're thinking, okay, well, before I get to that month over month growth, and I've got all these rates, like I gotta first like get the ball rolling. What advice would you have for them to be able to do that?
So I think the one thing you definitely don't do is hire a salesperson at the start. As the founder, you are the salesperson in chief, and you are personally signing that first deal, onboarding that first customer, end user, whatever you want to call it. And after 10 of those, 50, some reasonable vector of growth, then consider letting someone support you in doing that and growing with you. But the sort of the counterfactual is I see a number of founders in their founding team have a salesperson. And I'm like, I don't understand that, because the signal data that as a founder, if you're a builder founder like me, you you don't want like some intermediary sort of brokering the conversation. You want to hear it firsthand, warts and all. And if you make a product and somehow it goes shit and it's not doing what you want, you don't want to have a customer success team filtering out that along the way. On the flip side, the understanding when to hire those team members is actually really challenging. So hiring your first salesperson, great. Hiring a chief revenue officer, scary, because they're going to expect wanting to have enough product market fit that they can deploy their playbooks, an SDR team, sales ops, rev ops person, customer success team, and so on. And when we started Synctera, I got that wrong. We actually hired that team too soon, and we weren't ready yet. And I regret that because we sort of tried to grind ourselves ready for a big organization, and we were too soon. Now we have an amazing team, but we're so much different than we were even 2 years ago. And so timing of who and when to talk to customers, at the beginning, it has to be the founder or the founding team. I think that gets a little more nuanced if the founder isn't a builder. So if a founder themselves comes out of sales or finance or operations or logistics, their DNA will be to have somebody do that with them. And that's just a little bit of a different game. So as a founder, the one cool skill you get from working at a Google or a Facebook or Meta or whatever is that sense of being a mini CEO, but you have all this infrastructure that supports you, sales and marketing, product marketing, and all this sort of infrastructure. So you know what it should look like at the end state. The trap you get into is saying, well, I just left my team and I have this head of BD and a head of legal and a head of sales. I should have those when I start my company. And the reality is those sort of roles are privileged roles that you hire when you run out of capacity to do the contract review yourself and so forth.
Absolutely. The question I've always been fascinated by is when to know to pivot versus persist when you've
Mm.
got an idea. And a lot of, like, for example, people who build products, like builders, they tend to think, well, if I build it, they'll just come. And when they don't come, they're like, oh, you know what? Maybe this sucked and I'll just quit and I'll go build something else. Or sometimes they'll go and talk to people about it, because they're like, oh, maybe it's just that I don't have any eyeballs on it. And then they can't, maybe they go to the wrong person, maybe they've got the wrong message. And so you got to like figure out, decipher what it is that's wrong. Do you have the wrong product, the wrong customer you're targeting? And I've personally found myself struggling with deciphering which one I'm messing up on because you don't know what you don't know. How do you navigate that if you're, first time founder? How did you navigate it with all the startups that you've built and also like advised?
So the last statement you just made about advice is kind of like the key factor. As an early founder or with not a deep set of prior experiences to draw on to draw conclusions of I do this, I pivot or whatever, the best thing you can do is surround yourselves with neutral slash pro you advice on different topics, growth being one of them, revenue traction being another, um, fundraising strategies, and so on. And the paradox of that as an advisor is sitting there talking to the founder and saying, hey, you probably should do this. But knowing that it's just advice and I'm not on the board and I'm not an executive and I can't make them do it. And then the hardest part about it is if you were right and they took the wrong path, 3 months later, coming back and as gently as possible saying, hey, we missed this thing here. We could have avoided it, but what did you learn as a result? And the hard part about building companies is it's very apprenticeship style. It actually is a skill that it's very difficult to teach. And the incubators of the world, the YCs of the world, are effectively really strongly typed apprenticeship models, right? Do this on week 2, do this on week 4, put out a growth newsletter every single day, blah, 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 blah. It's a playbook. And it's like learning to be a really good house painter or something like that, or working on building sites. They're learning the playbook and the craft of it, but nothing substitutes from hey, I proposed this contract term. The customer giggled at me and said, that was the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And, but then learning from that, like, and saying, oh, okay, thanks. And this is the hard part for founders. A lot of negative feedback can easily be internalized as, I suck, I'm bad, I did something wrong. And it's really hard to distinguish between that and your own sort of personal learning in that moment, which it can be really, really valuable.
I've personally had moments where, I've got this idea and I build it out and I go to people and I talk to people. And as you said, you sometimes get that negative feedback. You're like, oh, this person just said it sucks. Maybe it sucks, and maybe I suck, and oh damn it, maybe this isn't the right thing to work on. You kind of start spiraling, and I've always wondered how to deal with kind of like that feedback. Do you take it and do you like? It's always been some that I've struggled. I've seen a lot of people struggle. Like there's all this information coming at you, and you're getting, especially from customers, from investors, from who like literally even friends. How do you deal with it? How do you build that kind of like feedback filter and discern what
Mhm.
you should do versus what's just noise?
Um, I think that the easiest analogy is to talk about the pitch deck. And so everybody has their own idea of what should be in a pitch deck. What should be the order of the slides? What's the most important slide? Do you have a revenue slide? Do you have an ask slide? Are you allowed to talk about the team? Not talk about the team? And then everyone sort of gets lazy and says, use the Sequoia format. And I know I tell every founder, when in doubt, use the Sequoia deck format, because it's actually a thoughtful way of framing your thinking. Whenever you're doing fundraising, every investor has a different preference, and you can't keep changing the docs based on what each investor wants, which means that your job is being able to take some facts and some things and adapt the presentation of them to the recipient in the moment. And in reverse, the feedback of your product's working or not working should be great signal to you to say, I'm either on the right path or the wrong path. And the hardest part about being a founder is picking which feedback to take, because everyone will give you it and it's all completely variant. Some of the feedback that I navigate is products that I think my mum could use. So at Uber, we had a product called Uber for Families. And I proved to my mum, who lives in Australia, that it was quicker for her to order an Uber. Liquidity in Canberra, where I grew up, was about 3 minutes than it was for her to get the car, go to the basement, get it out of the basement, unlock the garage, and all that sort of stuff. And then with Uber for Family, I could see whenever she did it. So it was before you had phone tracking. I could actually see my mum going to the doctor or going to the gym or whatever, and it made my life better. But I had to convince her firsthand to move from her fear of she really didn't know how to use a smartphone, and using Uber on a smartphone is pretty advanced. And my mum's a lovely person. She was in her mid to late 70s when we did this. But to get her to give up her car, this precious thing that gave her safety, was a really interesting thing. And as founders, our customers are always either stretching for new revenue, new growth, or something like that, or cost avoidance or fear avoidance or whatever. And building products to meet those goals is a dance. And I think to a certain extent, you basically have to be able to ignore all the feedback and just say, I'm right. I know I'm right. I'm going to stick at it. And then also have somebody around you that's going to call your bullshit and say, but I know you think you're right. It's not working, my friend. And it's not because you're a bad person. It's just not working. Try something else.
It seems like a big part of being able to navigate the feedback and find what kind of like discern what's noise and what's not is having the right kind of advisors around you, the people that you can go to and talk to about growth and about am I doing this right, am I doing this wrong, and get really personalized contextual feedback from. How do you build like a basically like a board of those like advisors? How do you get them around you? How do you convince them to speak with you and to spend their time with you? How do you prove your merit to them?
So I would say the most important thing about Silicon Valley and or tech startups and all of that sort of stuff is the network of humans that you choose to interact with. The quintessential network building tool in our space is LinkedIn, and being very deliberate about creating a persona on LinkedIn that reflects who you are and what you believe in will then elevate the people that believe in that sort of style of person and wanting to be with them as people to hang out with. You obviously picked out, reached out to me, totally random. And what I liked about what you did was you were just bold and you were creative, and I appreciated the straight up, let's go, let's have a chat. And a lot of people are quite shy and use LinkedIn more of as like a must do rather than a should do or a want to do. I find LinkedIn fascinating, and I find it takes a fair amount of my time every day. So I probably spend, I don't know, an hour and a half a day curating messaging and connecting new friends and stuff like that. But it's a deliberate exercise to expand the distribution of the message that I want to share. And I mean, it's not like Facebook or Instagram, which is very personal and profile driven. And I discourage folks using LinkedIn as Facebook or Instagram. And all of those people doing LinkedIn dating, stop it. But but I would say building your network is the most important thing, and that's why places like Silicon Valley are so special, because there's, I don't know, 20 meetups a day in all different verticals and tech strategies, and nerds hanging out with nerds, risk people hanging out with risk people, and that is your central building point. And there are a few places on earth that are like that. New York, sort of. Boston, if you're in healthcare, great. Most other verticals, not so much.
You think you moved there from Australia when you're a young man, and it seems like you've stuck around, and there's a lot of noise around San Francisco. A lot of people saying a lot of negative things, and they've all had their opinion. And some say, "Oh, you got to move to Bali." Some say, "Oh, your location doesn't matter at all." What do you think? Do you think San Francisco is still the place to be if you're a young man or woman, and you're thinking, "I want to build $1 billion startup, and I want to build big, impactful startups"?
There's nowhere better by far. Like the serendipity of the cool talent that exists here is so off the charts. Um, there's no replica. There are other places where if you happen to have its own center of gravity, if you're doing a finance app for Wall Street, be in New York because the talent pool will be there. But general purpose tech and almost all vertical forms of tech, whether it's fintech or banking or healthcare or whatever, they all have a home here. And from my side of things, I didn't actually start here in Silicon Valley. I spent my first year in Wilmington, North Carolina, of all places, and then 7 years in Orlando, 2 years in DC, and 2 years in Pittsburgh. I didn't get to DC to Pittsburgh until 2004, and so I've been. To be fair, I've been therefore been here 20 years. Uh, but I first came to Silicon Valley as a tourist, a tech tourist, in summer of 1991. And back in those days, it was all suits and ties. It was so different.
Interesting. You were a founder for a great deal of your career. You've also transitioned to being an investor. Now you write checks into companies as well. What is the most unexpected learning you've had since, you know, jumping over to the other side of the table, the one deciding who gets the check?
Um, so I don't know that I've really jumped. I've added to the table because I'm still a builder at heart and investor by night. Like it's my alter ego. But I would say the coolest thing that I found lately is there's actually a reasonably strong correlation between folks that I want to hang out in real world with in life and folks that I think have a chance of succeeding in investing and building. And I think that there's something to be said for the human nature of your relationship with another founder or builder is as important as whether or not you think their idea is great and you just want to give them money. Because there's so many great ideas, but then there's no sort of synergy or connection between you and the person building the idea. It's like, I mean, you might as well just put the money at Bank of America and earn 4% in a checking account or a savings account. It's an anonymity. And so by definition, it means I don't go into really big investment opportunities. I focus on things that are small where I can get to know the person. And but it's just a style thing, and I think it works for me. And I don't know if it'll work for everyone.
Hmm. What do you think are some things that make you like hanging out and spending time with a person? What do you think are some of those maybe traits or just things about them that make you think, oh, you know what, that guy's cool. I'd love to have a coffee with him.
So I really resonate well with folks with a strong sense of self. Who are they? What do they believe? How are they? And passionately hold on to their beliefs, but also then have the mental gymnastics skills to be able to negotiate another person's position. So if I say the sky is blue and you say the sky is green, can we have a polite conversation about why it's blue, not green, or green, not blue? Because I'm very much a believer in this sort of philosophical idea of idea, anti-idea, or thesis and antithesis. And by playing off both these competing ideas, you end up in a really good spot. So for me, people that are naturally intelligent, naturally inquisitive and incurious, self-aware, often there's a correlation between self-awareness and confidence. But if confidence is their missing link, I love helping people build their own confidence and feel like they're stronger or more capable than they thought they were. Maybe the alternative hypothesis is I don't like hanging out with people that are belligerent or just are assholes or are super wealthy but don't have any empathy or human connectivity skills.
Hmm. There's a lot of pieces of advice that are given out there on social media these days. What do you think are some pieces of advice you've personally seen that you think are just super overrated?
Um, I think the biggest one is that somebody believes that there's a playbook for doing this thing. Building companies have certain themes and things you can do that will increase your probability of success, but there isn't a 200-step test that you can, or playbook that you can go through that guarantees an outcome. And I think a lot of early founders get suckered into the belief that there is some magic playbook. And just because you get into YC doesn't guarantee that you're going to be successful, even if you follow everything that YC tells you to do. And um, I think the other thing that is true that in my mind is when things don't work out, learning and adapting to what didn't work out and then having the wisdom to spot it the next time is unlearnable skills, except in person. As much as I would love to help a founder avoid stepping into a hole, sometimes they have to step in the hole to themselves to realize what's going on. And where it gets out of control is if the founder just says, I've got these 3 great advisors, they tell me everything to do, I just do what they say, and it's all going to be great. I profoundly disbelieve that.
Do you want to talk a little bit about Synctera before we go? Just give a quick shout out to what you're building now.
Yeah, for sure. So Synctera is a 4-year-old company. We've raised 80 million bucks through our Series A1 that's helping bridge the gap between community banks that want to get new sources of revenue and deposits and accounts and tech companies or businesses that want to add banking to whatever else they do. So the goal here is to make the marketplace healthy. So it's a two-sided marketplace with demand coming in the form of fintechs, supply coming in the form of banks, and building the infrastructure in the middle that helps them work together. Hard problem space, had a lot of anecdotal pain over the last 12 months due to the industry shenanigans. But banking and payments is a universe that if you can survive through the challenging times, there's a lot of upside and there's a lot of value in building these programs and platforms that are very iceberg-like. So you can only see the tip of the product through the API. And what you miss is the infrastructure and the experience that makes the platform actually work under the covers. So Synctera is super fun. We've grown quite nicely. We're now getting to the sort of place where we're optimizing the team to get to a break-even situation, which will take us some time. It's not like these things happen overnight. And we're really, really lucky that our customer base is with us and helping us grow.
You mentioned raising $80 million. I want to ask you one question about kind of like fundraising. What would you say are some like ultimate tips you would go through for founders who are kind of looking at fundraising and they're thinking, "Oh man, got to do this." Maybe they've never done it before. What are some just general maybe piece of advice or lessons you've learned fundraising that you could impart onto them?
Always be raising. You are always fundraising. You're approaching every conversation with, are these people going to help me grow? will they give me money to invest in my company? And it's not like when you finish your seed round, you stop fundraising and then you come back 12 months later and start fundraising again. You're perpetually having those conversations. And if you're thinking you're building something big, you're having conversations today that don't even yield an investment for 3 to 5 years. So the folks that are investing in us today are conversations that happened when we were at the seed and the pre-seed stage. And then every year you re-meet with those same investment teams and you build a relationship. And if you're showing a nice trajectory, at some point you'll reach whatever critical threshold of valuation or revenue or whatever is going to be the tipping point for them to want to invest. So it's a continuous journey. I would say that it's definitely a law of numbers game. And it can be quite frustrating to do 100 meetings and receive 100 no's, or send a pitch deck out and get 0 replies. But the answer is there's a nearly infinite list, a range of different types of folks that could invest, from your friends as angels to the biggest corporations, the sovereign wealth funds that will only write $2 billion checks. And everywhere in between, there are ranges of folks that could invest in you, but don't know that you're out there. And so it really is a game where you have to think about, how do I get access to an awareness from as many people as possible?